the most important part of all of this is that the real tragedy has yet to occur. The vast majority of these people are still alive, which means they can still be saved.
Hey, Dave Bolger here. Doing things a little differently this week, coming out a little early. I just wrapped up recording a conversation with Matt Zeller, class of 2004. If you've been paying attention at all to what's going on in Afghanistan, there's a very good chance you have heard from or seen Matt Zeller in the media. Matt is a combat veteran of the war in Afghanistan and a former CIA analyst. He has been very outspoken for a long time about the need to evacuate and help those that helped U.S. soldiers in the war. If you don't know, and Matt tells the story, Matt was working with an interpreter in Afghanistan who saved his life, and he, like many others, recognized the importance of now saving the lives of those that helped them. So I wanted to get this out immediately so those of you in the Hamilton community who want to help can help. One way is to visit nooneleft.org. Again, nooneleft.org. It's the website of the organization that Matt co-founded, No One Left Behind. And again, for months, Matt and this organization have been working to get those that helped the U.S. military out of harm's way and out of Afghanistan. This conversation's powerful, it's eye-opening, it's frustrating. So have a listen. Here is Matt Zeller, class of 2004, talking about the current situation in Afghanistan and the work he's doing.
Hey, Dave.
Hello there.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm exhausted.
That was actually going to be one of the first things I asked you is have you slept?
I think I added it up. I think I've slept 14 hours in the last 5 days.
Holy shit.
6 days? What day is it today? Thursday? This started on Saturday? That when this started? I don't know. It's I'm doing a deployment from my living room.
Yeah. I heard you say on I don't know if it was MSNBC. I was looking at you on, and you talk about how you're just running a command center from your living room, making phone calls nonstop and working. I just can't. Well, one, thank you for doing this in light of all that.
Anything for Hamilton, you know that.
You're a good man. But I mean, my God. And, you said it started on Saturday, but there you go. That's what you need.
Waiting all day for that. I hope you don't mind.
My only regret and disappointment is that I'm not joining you. I'm going to run downstairs and get some. What are you drinking?
I'm having a Irish whiskey, a yellow spot.
All right. I don't know that.
You want to go grab something?
No, it's all right. I'd have to tiptoe past my sleeping kids. So, but you just said that there was this. When did this all start? But I mean, my God, for you, this has been a years long endeavor. Like I've seen the passion from you on some of your media appearances. How pissed off are you?
I'm going back and forth. Like I'm a combination of frustrated and angry because this was eminently preventable.
Yeah.
I gotta be honest, I feel like a failure because for 8 years I was trying to prevent this exact nightmare scenario and it didn't work.
Yeah.
It seems to be that everyone has finally woken up and paid attention to the fire that I've been warning about, but it's too late. It's raging, and it might be raging beyond the point of control. But I will tell you this, that is all coupled by the fact, and maybe even mitigated by the fact that there's the best of America on display right now. It's not by our government in terms of the leadership. I mean, clearly we can get into what's gone wrong, but there is a army of veterans, diplomats, aid workers, human rights activists, faith activists, anybody who has any tiny little smidgen of a tie to Afghanistan and cares about these people, or just cares about doing the right thing, have stood up when history needed them most to stand up, and have said, no, we're gonna be these people's, lifeline. Mm-hmm. We're calling it a digital Dunkirk. I'm on a deployment from my living room with thousands of other Americans who are, we've put our lives on hold, and all we're doing is trying to keep this promise and make sure that these people get out safely. And so literally, as soon as I hang up with you here tonight, I'm going to go back on shift, because we're recording this right now at 8:30 p.m. So Afghanistan's 8.5 hours. So it's about 5 o'clock in the morning in Afghanistan. The sun is just coming up. And so basically between now until when the sun comes up here in the United States, I'm going to be trying to help people in Kabul get around Taliban checkpoints and try to get into the airport in the hopes that they can get out safely.
And how do you do that? Who are you talking to? What's the work to make that happen?
So we're literally doing it over Signal, the secure communications app.
Yeah.
There is we're doing this at this point now with military precision. We finally, got ourselves really well. The first day was chaotic. It was just people trying to help each other. The second day, everyone realized we needed to put, some managerial processes in place to really effectively manage the flow of information and maximize the effectiveness of our effort. So we just fell back on our training. We've set up a tactical operations center, or what you would call a joint operations center, a TOC or a JOC. We've got a regular battle update brief. So every 12 hours, the coalition is putting out that this is what's happened on the ground in the last 12 hours. These are our needs. We have intelligence analysts who have been pulling commercial satellite imagery of the airport, and in real time using either open source reporting, what you see on the press, or people on the ground with their cell phones, plotting where the Taliban checkpoints are in real time, so that we can then, when an interpreter who's in Kabul calls up and says, hey, I need to get to the airport, but it's not safe, here's where I am, we can guide them on the phone in real time and say, okay, you're going to get to this street and you're going to turn right because there's a checkpoint, just ahead of you. And it is a whole of America effort. I've got friends who have been organizing private planes and have raised at this point tens of millions of dollars to fund that. I've got friends that are organizing homes for people to stay in once they arrive in the United States. The frustrating thing, and I think it was probably best put by the OG of all of this, is this guy named Kirk Johnson. He wrote a book called To Be a Friend is Fatal, and he was the founder of something called the List Project. So the List Project was, Kirk was a USAID officer in Iraq in 2004 and 5. And he came back home. And even back then, he realized that our wartime allies were being hunted down systemically by our enemies and being killed because of their service with us. And so he just started collecting a list of names of people that he knew in Iraq were in duress. And he ended up testifying before Congress. And it was his advocacy, his testimony, his passion that ultimately caused Congress to create the special immigration visa program through which all these people are now trying to get here. He and I were literally texting last night at 3 o'clock in the morning because he was trying to help a family that had, something like a woman in her late years, 70s, 80s, with some young kids. You have to understand, put yourself in their place. It's August. It's really hot in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. It's really humid. There's no running water. It's not like you can, there's places to go buy a bottle of water. There's no food. There aren't toilets. There's a mass of just humans that you can't get through physically to get to the gate. And the Taliban are there making it 10 times worse. They're shooting into the crowd. They're shooting over the crowd. They're sometimes shooting actually people in the crowd. They're trying to spark an international incident because they're trying to get the crowd to surge into the U.S. forces and cause us to have to use force to push them back. Mm-hmm. To try to manage the crowd, U.S. forces have been forced to resort to using tear gas and warning shots, and it's total chaos and pandemonium.
And that's just for people. And that's just for people who have been able either to be in Kabul or have made it to Kabul.
Right. We're not even talking about the 50,000 people that we're tracking who are outside of Kabul, seemingly with no means to get there. And if you think the situation in Kabul is bad, you ought to hear about the lives that these people are having to live. We know that the Taliban are actively doing door-to-door searches throughout Afghanistan, not just in Kabul. But the difference is that in Kabul, when they come to someone's home, they tell them with a smile on their face that they're making a list and that they're going to be back when the Americans leave. In the external cities, the outlying cities, they're not making a list. They're just disappearing folks. We already have 2 known videotaped examples of crimes against humanity in Kandahar. One was an execution of people in which they dug a ditch into the side of the road and just shot them. And the other was they brought back the mass executions in front of, stadiums filled with people. They made as many men as they could fit into the Kandahar soccer pitch. They made them all come out and sit and watch them behead a couple of people the other day. It's I don't care how much they want to argue that they're a reformed new Taliban. They're the same thugs as they were 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And could you imagine being like a U.S. Marine or soldier who has to stand on point 50 meters away from these thugs as they're beating people up, stabbing people, trying to cause the crowd to surge so that they trample people, and not being able to do a thing about it other than just sit there and stare at them?
You said you've been talking about this for 8 years. Help me understand the argument. I don't even know on what side of this is the dumb rhetoric you hear of, well, they had 20 years to prepare for this. They, being Afghanistan, had 20 years to prepare for this. So why should we care now? You said, for years you've been saying that this is happening. How do we get to this point? How are we not prepared?
That's such a great question. So it begins with the Obama administration's inability to properly and effectively manage the special immigration visa program in Afghanistan. So the special immigration visa program was created in 2009 for Afghanistan, and through its first 4 years, it really didn't function. The numbers prove it. They could have given out in those 4 years a total of 6,000 visas. They only gave out 897. And the reason why was because it turned out that the State Department had 2 policies. One unofficially was called "when in doubt, keep them out." And the other was that they claimed that nothing in the law actually compelled them to issue visas. It simply required them to make one available for application. So they literally were taking people's paperwork and putting it into a filing cabinet, never to see the light of day again. The other thing that they were doing is that if they did deny, actually get to the point where they had to make a decision on a visa, they would often just deny them. And the applicants up until 2014 did not have the right to know why their visa had been denied in the first place. Do you know what the most common reason for denying a visa was? It was because they misspelled their transliterated name. There's no standard naming convention for the name Mohammed in the US government. So, I mean, it was just, clearly stupid reasons. Well, we got the law changed in 2014. I myself and a lady named Katie Reisner physically wrote it. We had gone to meet with Senators Shaheen and John McCain 3 days after Janice, the interpreter who saved my life, had arrived in the United States. They actually invited us up to meet with them in a private meeting in Senator Shaheen's office. And they listened attentively while Janice described just how arduous it was of a process to get here. And I'll never forget Senator McCain going, "God damn it, Gene, we need to fix this mess. It's Vietnam all over again." And those words have just stuck in the back of my mind ever since, because he's like, "We can't let this happen again. Not again. We're not going to do another Nam. You have my full support." So Senator Shaheen at that point turns to this lady, Katie Reisner, who was Janice's immigration attorney, and me, and they said, "Can you come up with some recommendations?" We said, "Sure. When do you need them by?" They said, "Now." So we went down to the Senate cafeteria, which is in the basement of the Dirksen Senate office building, and literally on a napkin sketched out what ultimately would be the verbatim language that was used in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act that fundamentally changed the program. So what the changes were as follows. One, from 2014 on, the State Department by law had to render a decision on a person's application within 270 days of receiving it. No more putting it in a filing cabinet. The second was is that applicants had the right to appeal their decision and also be given the reasons as to why their visa application had been denied in the first place. And finally, we raised the annual cap on the number of visas that the State Department could give out. For the first 4 years of the program, that cap was at 1,500 visas a year. Ever since 2014, the cap has been at 4,000 visas a year. And then, so that's really important, just to pause here. So, because the first 4 years of the program, because they were so poorly managed, created a sizable backlog of about 10,000 families. And that backlog has never diminished. Even now, there are some people who have been in that backlog literally for 10 years, but for the vast majority, we've been able to get through them slowly over time. But you have to understand, for every application that was able to get out the door, another 2 or 3 came in and got into the queue. Mm-hmm. And then the Trump administration came along. And people like Stephen Miller went about purposely trying to dismantle this program. While it might have been ineptitude in the Obama administration, it was purposeful malfeasance in the Trump administration. And again, the numbers don't lie. If you look at the arrival numbers by year, the first year Trump was in office, they were under 4,000 visas. They're around 3,000. The next year, they were down to 1,500. The year after that, they were down to a couple hundred. And the last year, they were under 100 total, right? What did that do? It just created an even larger backlog because people continue to apply to the program. This is the reason why I go through that history, is because that creates the situation in which we're now. The 88,000 people that we are tracking who served with us as a wartime ally and their family members, those people could have been evacuated years ago if the visa program had worked as intended and functioned. But because it didn't, we have now this population of folks who are in duress and need our support. So that gets us to the visa thing. Now let's talk about the military campaign of the Taliban, because this is really important. About a month ago, the Taliban took a border crossing with the nation of Pakistan called Spin Boldak. It's near the federal administered tribal areas of Pakistan, near the city of Quetta. And this was really key because the Taliban have run themselves out of Quetta. It's been they're like the Taliban Central for the last 20 plus years. And they had a reserve army, mostly of Pakistani fighters trained in madrasas, waiting to pour into Afghanistan armed to the teeth. And as soon as they were able to take the border crossing at Spin Boldak, that's what they did. And that's why you saw this rapidity, the swiftness with which they were able to just seemingly overthrow city after city. They poured so many fighters into the country that they were able to fight the Afghan army everywhere. And despite the fact that our president seems to think that the Afghan military should be the ones to be blamed for having to stop this Taliban onslaught, I would argue they might have been the most heroic people in the fight. I trained the Afghan military. I spent a year living on one of their bases, eating their food, being a guest, of their country and experiencing just the wonder of their hospitality. These were people who weren't paid on time, if ever. They often weren't resupplied. They didn't have enough fuel or ammunition. And yet they kept showing up to the fight every day, over and over. I just got off an interview I did with Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who was both the ambassadors to Iraq at one point and then later Afghanistan. And he's seen amongst the veteran community as a hero for what he did in those positions to ensure that these visa programs were created and then ultimately implemented so long as he was in charge effectively. He said something that's just going to haunt me forever, because I remember being in one of these myself at ISAF headquarters, the International Security Assistance Force headquarters in Kabul, when he was ambassador, probably through the entirety of the war. There was a fallen comrade ceremony once a week in which representatives of all the allied nations would show up, and you would have a memorial service for people who had been killed in the line of duty that week. And one by one, if an American had died that week, a U.S. soldier would get up and read the names of the Americans who passed, and the Brits and the Canadians and so on and so forth. Again, a member of each of their respective nations being the one to read the names. The Afghans went last. They didn't read names, they read a number. 162, 134.
Wow.
In 1 year, the Afghan army would lose more people than we would in the entirety of the last 20. They lost over 70,000 people fighting these thugs. To imply that they tucked tail and ran, I don't have words for how disappointed I am in our president for having said that. And I got to tell you, I've been wondering all along who's advising him. I'm now convinced more than ever it's people who don't have a clue, who never have been there and don't know these people.
It reeked very early on in that speech and throughout that it was very much it's Trump's fault, not my fault, and passing of the buck and not trying to address the problem at hand.
I mean, it's definitely Trump's fault. Trump plays a huge role in this. Let's start there.
Sure,
I mean, he
sure.
can't be dismissed. The again, that backlog absolutely is on the Trump administration for how bad it got under their watch. The fact that we even negotiated with the Taliban is ridiculous in and of itself, right? The fact that we committed to this ridiculous withdrawal date of the 1st of May without even negotiating and consulting our NATO allies who went into war with Afghanistan with us is ridiculous. And by the way, I don't know if you read the Financial Times today, but there's a growing movement in Europe to re-examine the alliance. The article specifically stated numerous European defense ministers and officials on record stating, we expected this type of unilateral behavior amongst the Americans when the Trump folks were in charge, but Biden promised that democracy was back, that America was back, that collaboration and respecting our allies and working together was back. And yet we seemingly made this decision unilaterally. And they're apoplectic over it, and they have every right to be.
Yeah.
And so,
why do you think why do you think this is happening? Why in this administration is this the approach?
Well, I think the president has been fixated on stopping this war for a very long time. I worked in the Central Intelligence Agency during the Obama administration on Afghanistan. And I distinctly remember there were two camps within the administration. There was the Obama camp, which at that point was trying to figure out whether or not it really wanted to commit to the surge as recommended by General McChrystal. And then there was the Biden camp, that was the president at the time, his national security briefer, Tony Blinken, now the Secretary of State. And they were the proponents of what everyone called CT light, counterterrorism light. The idea that we would leave a very small number of special operations forces within Afghanistan to be able to ostensibly keep Al-Qaeda, in check. And that's all would be needed going forward. Look, I wanted this war to end as much as anybody else because wars are abhorrent things. And we're honestly getting to the point where it would have been the equivalent of Vietnam had still been going on when I first entered Hamilton, right? It needed to end. Mm-hmm. But how you end it is so crucially important.
Right.
And we're screwing it up left and right every way we can. I mean, just take the airport alone. There's an army of people right now. Again, I told you, we've raised millions of dollars. We have more planes than we probably need at this point to get it done. And we can't fly. It's not because we don't have the permission to fly our private aircraft that we've chartered into Kabul. And it's not, we've got that. Up until today, we did not have permission to take the Afghans that we picked up with us to another place. Now we have that permission. You know what we don't have? Enough runway space. There's one working runway at the Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul. One, that's it. And it's not just our military that's trying to fly people in and out. It's every other nation that has a military capability to be able to do that, right? Every member of NATO has sent at least one aircraft to take their people away. There just isn't enough places. There isn't enough space to put planes. And we don't have enough time to build new airfields. So if we're really going to do this, the only way we actually can probably get this done and truly take all of these people with us is we're going to have to retake airfields that we held mere months or weeks ago. And the thing that I am rolling the dice on, my bet is that the Taliban will let us, that they'll step back and they won't engage because they want the country more than they want these people. And so for once, we ought to declare to them what we're going to do rather than ask for permission. We ought to just say, look, we're coming in, we're retaking these airfields. If you try to resist, you'll be met with lethal and overwhelming force. We're simply here to get our people. Once it's done, we will leave.
Presumably, they don't want to engage in another, a restart of the war. Right?
They don't want to just engage in the restart of the war. There's elements of the Taliban that are actually seemingly I don't want to take them at their word. They're thugs. They're liars.
Yeah.
But if they're truly saying that they want these people, that they want these people gone, that they don't want, I get this. I get the calculus. They know that if these people stay behind, it's going to be very hard to keep a lot of their fighters in check, right? Because again, think of it from the Taliban's perspective. The Afghans who stood with us helped kill them for the last 20 years, them and their families. They want revenge. And that concept of revenge is a really particular aspect among certain elements of Afghan society, particularly the Taliban who come from the South, those who come from the ethnic group of the Pashtuns, because they're almost honor bound to try and take revenge on people who have harmed them and their families. It's just, it's an overwhelming scenario when you really start thinking about it. But I keep saying this, the most important part of all of this is that the real tragedy has yet to occur. The vast majority of these people are still alive, which means they can still be saved. Mm-hmm. But we don't seem to have the courage and conviction to do the right thing. The Secretary of Defense in a press conference just yesterday said something that shocked me as much as what the president said the other day. He said that he didn't have the ability to safely move Americans inside of Kabul to the airport. Yes, he does. We're the United States of America. We have the most powerful military on the planet. He absolutely has the capability. What he lacks are the orders, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We lack the political will to do what is necessary at this point. And I wish that the president would honestly get out of the bubble that he's surrounded in terms of whatever these people are telling him, because if you would just see the public reaction, I've run for office as a Democrat. I come from a pretty strong Republican family, and I was just home in upstate New York. I was supposed to be on vacation, but that ended the day the Taliban took Kabul. My relatives to a person have all reached out to me and said, we have to take these people with us. These are people who would, you would not think would, given their politics, would not be in support of immigration and haven't been. But when it comes to these people, they get it. There is no us and them, and there's just us.
Yeah. And it's not even a case of these are people who tangentially helped. In your case, and in many cases, these are people who fought alongside you, right?
I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now if it hadn't been for Janice.
Yeah.
He killed 2 Taliban fighters who were about to kill me on the 14th day of my war. I had been in country for 2 weeks. When we went out on missions, we had these radios that are like CB radios. They're called ICOM radios. And the Taliban would use them to communicate. Anybody could hear anybody talking, but they would use code. Whenever they were about to shoot us, they would say, shoot the eyes first. The eyes were the code for interpreter. Why? Because they were our eyes and ears to the world. And they understood that without that person, we were combat ineffective. We couldn't communicate with the world. So, they
were on the front line. They were literally on the front line. Wow.
They were literally on the front line. And unlike the Americans with whom they served, they didn't have the luxury of getting to go back to the United States when their tour of duty was over. They just went on to the next unit and the next mission time and time again. I have told anybody who will listen, in our relationship, Janice is the veteran. He did 9 tours. If he had been born an American, we would say this is a 9-tour combat veteran. But for whatever reason, people seem to care more about where he placed in the birth lottery than what he did with his time on this planet.
And I could be wrong, but I assume that most of these, I don't know about Janice, but most of these interpreters aren't exactly trained soldiers to start. So,
so Janice is man, what a story he has. Janice's dad was a real senior official in the Afghan Air Force. He was the guy who was in charge of training all of their Air Force pilots how to fly back during the Najibullah regime of the late 70s and 80s. Janice's family wasn't political. While his dad did serve, under the communist government, he had been serving as an Air Force officer going all the way back to the king. He was just one of those people who was, a military professional, and the politics of the government changed, but he remained, a guy just serving in the Air Force. Because of his position, they had a really pretty, comfortable life. They lived on an Afghan Air Force base, and they, lived in the housing for senior officers and their families. I asked Janice once to tell me what it was like to watch that world slip away. I said, did it all happen at once? Did it go gradually? And he said, well, there definitely were attacks, and the city would get more and more violent, and it escalated. But he said, I distinctly remember the week it all went to shit. I said, what happened? He said, it started on a Wednesday. He said his dad had come home and he told everybody that they were going to get to watch TV that night. And I said, your parents are really strict. I was like, and he said, yeah, well, it wasn't that. He said, we only had one TV channel in Afghanistan at that time. It was the government channel, and it only broadcast on Fridays for 3 hours. So the fact that there was TV on a Wednesday was like a really big deal. And so they all gather in front of the TV, and the president, Dr. Najibullah, comes out, and he announces that he's made a deal with the Mujahideen and that they have been invited to come to Kabul to form a transitional government. There's going to be elections, and that, he will honor the result of those elections. The next day, that was that night, Wednesday night. So Thursday morning, Janice watched Ahmed Shah Massoud's militia take the police station across the street from his family. And then he watched Dostum's militia come and take his the actual Air Force base that they lived on. They came in, they disarmed all the soldiers, they started beating them up. And then as soon as the militias entered Kabul, he said it was like a day of just wholesale looting. Everything got stripped. If it wasn't nailed down, it got stolen. That was Thursday. Friday, they get up. He and his mom are preparing a midday brunch, for the family in the kitchen. And they lived on the third floor of this apartment block with these big bay windows that could over the big view of the city in front of them. He watched 2 MiG fighters fly across the sky. They bombed the TV building. They banked left and flew over to the power plant and bombed the power plant. And then the lights went out. And as Janice tells it, the lights went out and they didn't come back on for the next 10 years. A massive firefight erupted all around them. And they moved into their basement of their apartment building with all the other families from the apartment building for the next 6 months. And when they came out, Kabul was in rubble. That's the Afghanistan that the Taliban inherited at the end of the 90s, a nation in ruins with not a modern military and only a couple of tanks, to sustain them. The Taliban now own more Black Hawk helicopters than 166 nations on the planet, to include the nation of Australia. They have fighter jets. They have armed drones. They have divisions worth of Humvees and MRAPs. Every one of those pictures that you see of Taliban fighters on TV, they're carrying US-made weapons. Taliban 2.0 is going to be so much more frightening than the Taliban 1.0. And Taliban 1.0 were the hosts of Al Qaeda. When you start realizing just how bad things have become, you can't help but wonder if there might have been a better way to have done all of this. And that's where it gets back to this just unilateral decision to go it alone and, just end it for this. I get it. They wanted to end it, but
yeah.
Imagine if they had done this in the way that we had asked of them, which was months ago. We quietly reached out to the administration when they first took office. A lady named Kim Stifiri and myself, she's the founder of an organization called the Association of Wartime Allies. We offered she called me up in October of last year, and she said, Matt, it doesn't matter who wins this election. We're leaving Afghanistan, and we got to start getting the people out now. The visa program is not going to get them out sufficiently. The last thing we want is a chaotic exit from one airport in Kabul while the Taliban are ostensibly shooting at us. I said, okay, Kim, we got to get that word spread in DC, the way that you do that is you write a white paper and then you try to get it in the right hands. So we wrote this thing over the holidays. And in February, when it was finally completed, we started sending it to the administration. We told them point blank that the special immigration visa program was broken and would not be sufficient enough to get these people here on time, and that what was needed would be the largest airlift since 1948. They never responded. So we publicly put the paper out there with, a whole consortium of organizations, the Truman Project, Human Rights First, Veterans for American Ideals, the International Refugee Assistance Project, Common Defense, a whole number of organizations. We figured, okay, maybe they'll pay attention now. They didn't. So then we started writing op-eds. I wrote an op-ed on the 2nd of April in which I said, the crux of my argument was that when collapse occurs in Afghanistan, it would happen faster than DC could respond, and that given Afghanistan's unique place physically in the world, the geopolitical relations that the United States has with some of its neighbors like China and Iran, given the difficulty of the terrain it finds itself in and the lack of, a lot of modern infrastructure, again, only one airport in a city of millions with only one active runway, that this would be an extremely difficult rescue mission to pull off, and that it was going to take time. And that's why we recommended that they do it quietly in the winter when it was not yet fighting season. And we still had troops and personnel and equipment in place to have done this. I don't think it's that far-fetched to imagine a scenario in which you had, helicopters flying out to disparate villages all around Afghanistan and picking up a family here, picking up a family there, bringing them back to an air base, and then loading them onto a plane and flying them out gradually. We could have done this over a course of months. Now, the reality is that the Taliban have said that they will not tolerate our presence beyond the 31st of August. Our Secretary of Defense has said that unless, I'll say it for him, unless he's given the order, he can't get Americans or anyone else to the airport in Kabul. And now, by our estimates, there's some 30 to 40,000 people who have parked themselves in front of the perimeter of the airport with no means to get through them, regardless if you're a U.S. citizen, an Afghan interpreter, you name it, someone deserving to be on that flight. It just seems seemingly impossible to get them to that lifeline.
And given where we are, and you making the noise you're making, and many of your fellow former soldiers making the noise they're making, do you sense that there's going to be any movement, or is the administration listening now differently?
I don't know. I know we have the administration. So I know for a fact we have the administration's ear, because so when I say we started reaching out to these people, we did in February. Yeah. I finally got my meeting. Happened today. I met with the folks running the task force with Ambassador Jacobson. And we told them, we want to be your friends. We get that we might be a pain in the butt publicly in the media, but we want to be proactive partners, that we are their friends. We're trying to help them, and that we have an army of people who are capable of doing it, and that we can more effectively communicate in real time with the Afghans that we're trying to get into the airport than they can. They can just bulk email people, but they don't have the physical personal relationships like this digital Dunkirk movement has. Because again, the majority of the people involved in this movement are veterans like me who have maintained personal relationships with these people going back, in some cases, 20 years. Yeah. They're our family. There are people. We can most effectively communicate with them. And so my hope is that now that they finally have started paying attention to us and are listening to us, that maybe we can at least begin to more effectively and efficiently get these people into the airport and out of the country. But the one guy who could seemingly actually pull off the entirety of the real rescue is the president of the United States. Because again, I don't know how somebody in Herat is at this point able to make it to Kabul safely, right? And so unless we go and get those people, they're not going to be able to make it safely. The Association of Wartime Allies started out as a Facebook group, a private Facebook group for Afghans and Iraqis who are trying to get through the visa program to just simply get questions answered in real time, because that's been their biggest frustration. With this visa thing is, it's just so monolithic and opaque. You fill out a form, but there's no human being you can talk to ask questions of. If they if they send you a response, it's from an email address that won't ever, get a human being to actually read it and reply back to you. And so the Afghans and the Iraqis were telling us for years that all they wanted was just somebody that could be able to answer questions in real time. Mm-hmm. So we stood up something like that. We did it in a private Facebook group in which the only way you could get in was you had to show your paperwork, or somebody knew you and could vouch for you and said, no, I worked with that person. They're good to go. We static IP pinged their addresses to make sure they actually were claiming, where they claimed to be in the world was in fact where they were, so that we weren't getting spoofed. And we're pretty confident that, of the 14,000 plus people that are now in this private Facebook group, we have most of the applicants, right? With the government estimates that there's about 20,000 of these people who need visas. Now, that's not 20,000 visas total. That's 20,000 individuals plus their family members. When you extrapolate it out, it's 88,000 people or more. That's just of the most recent government report, which was written before we changed the eligibility rules, which we just did a month ago, which by our estimation means that we might have doubled that number. Long and short, we're probably talking around 250,000 people when this is all really said and done. Wow. But the fact that no one listened to us is what's going to haunt me, because we knew where all these people were going back months ago. We've been pulling them on sometimes now on a daily basis. We have their phone numbers, their email addresses, their physical locations, all of their information that they would need to get through these gates and to get onto one of these flights. And we've been trying to offer it to the administration for months, and no one listened until finally till today, when we finally got our meeting with the administration. And so my hope is that, we're building enough pressure on the one guy whose opinion we've got to change. Because if the president of the United States gave the order, this could be a completely different scenario. But right now, because he refuses to act in the way that is needed, you're only going to continue to see the chaotic situations that you're seeing at the airport right now. Wow. And it's going to get worse as more and more people realize that we're not going to reopen airfields in their city, and that they desperately try to make it to the one place that they know they might be able to get out of. Again, you don't bucket brigade past babies and children to the front of the line. Yeah. And then they're literally throwing the kids over the concertina wire in some cases, where then U.S. service members are having to catch babies, infants, because the hope is that if they get their kid on the other side, then we have to let the adult in to be with the child as well.
My God.
My God is right.
So for those that are listening to this, short of getting the president to change his mind, what can people do to help the cause?
I don't even know where to begin. Okay. First off, I break this down into two buckets. There is a tremendous need right now for people to be involved in the digital Dunkirk effort. There are more people asking us to put their information onto the official list for evacuation and to help them coordinate movements than there are volunteers. If folks want to get involved in that, we honestly are still trying to we're working with Google to set up a way to effectively manage, not only the Afghans that we're trying to assist in all their information, but now the flood of volunteers who also want to be a part of this effort. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that the real thing that's needed is what's going to happen for once these people arrive here in the United States. They need what we would call a first friend. Most of these people are coming from a country that they don't use credit cards or ATM cards. I remember when Janice first arrived here, I took him to CVS because he got heartburn for the first time in his life because our food is so much greasier than theirs. And I was going to buy him, some Pepcid or some heartburn medicine. And we get up to the front where you check out, and I pull out my credit card to pay for it. And he goes, "Wait a minute, what just happened? Where'd the money go?" Because he had never seen a credit card. He had never been in a building that had escalators until he arrived in the United States. They don't know about 911 because there isn't a 911 system in Afghanistan. So if it's 3:00 in the morning and their loved one is sick and needs to go to the hospital, they need an American that they can call and essentially ask any question at any time of day. They need people to help them find jobs and to plug them in and advocate for them in the same way that you would for your own loved one. And I guarantee you this, if you rise to the occasion and seek out one of these families and offer yourself to be their first friend, it's going to change you way more than it's going to change them. Without question, these will be people that you will be inviting to your Thanksgiving table for the rest of your life, because they're just that wonderful. And this experience in helping these people start a new life is so powerful. The rules used to be that they were only allowed to bring one bag per person. It had to fit in the overhead flight bin and be under 50 pounds. People getting out aren't allowed to bring bags. They're just going to the airport without the clothes that are on their backs. They're literally going to have to start over from scratch. They need all the help and support we can give them. But I got to tell you, that's the thing I'm most confident about. I've seen over the last 8 years just what this country can do for these people and how generous people can be and how much, the Hamilton community alone has been so instrumental in helping resettle these people. Not just from a financial standpoint, but from helping us, in previous administrations connect with the right people that we needed to politically to solve a problem, to literally a couple of years ago, the lacrosse team decided to adopt No One Left Behind and would hold campus-wide, bake sales and fundraisers to try to support the mission in our efforts. I got pinged today by a member of one of those lacrosse teams who I haven't talked to in a couple of years, reoffering the team's support, even though they're all now graduates and have gone on to other parts of their lives. That type of, compassion, that's the best of us.
Yeah. And
that's why I have a lot of hope for the people we can get out. These people aren't coming to take our jobs. They're coming to create them.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does someone become a first friend? What's the first step in doing that?
So there are a number of organizations you can reach out to. You can reach out to the organization I founded, like No One Left Behind. Okay. You can reach out to organizations. So the other organizations that are resettling these people officially are Catholic Charities, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, HIAS, which is a Jewish affiliated organization that does the same type of work, Church World Service, and the International Rescue Committee. All of those organizations have had their budgets decimated by the Trump administration. Their personnel have been laid off. They're operating but with a skeleton crew right now, and they're about to be asked to do the largest refugee movement in a generation, right? They're going to need every bit of financial and physical and mental and support that people can muster.
Well, I'm raising my hand, and I'll make sure that the community, the Hamilton community, listen to this, will do the same. It feels foolish and a waste of time to get into what I normally get into in these conversations, given how long we've taken and the work you have ahead of you. So I'm going to ask that once this is all settled and you fulfill your goal of getting everybody home, then we'll have the normal conversation where we reminisce about the Hamilton days and talk rugby.
I would love that. I got to tell you, it's Hamilton that's helped sustain me in a lot of my darkest times through this. My journey throughout all of this began at Hamilton. I was a sophomore on 9/11. I ironically was in a class called History of the Silk Road that morning, and we were talking about Afghanistan when the planes hit the towers. When I went to war, I would keep in my mind a memory bank of like life moments and places that I could kind of close my eyes and bring myself back to try to center myself, and just a way of collecting my emotions and my thoughts in overwhelming circumstances. I very much feel like I've said throughout this interview, like I'm on a deployment again, this time from my living room. Yeah. And I've found myself doing what I did, 13 years ago. I'm finding myself in moments of day of closing my eyes, and I'm doing it right now. I'm taking a walk through the Glen, right? Like I can be sitting, in my dorm room at Babbitt as a senior, right? Overlooking Minor Field. I could be on the pitch with my rugby brothers. Like, it's just that life experience the privilege of being a graduate of our fine alma mater is something that, sustains me even in my darkest of times. So if the Hamilton community hears this, I just want to thank you all, because I'm not the only veteran from Hamilton, who feels this way, but we all feel your love and support, and you've been staunch allies with this throughout it all. And just so thank you for that.
Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for all the work you're doing now. And personally, thank you. I'm dumbstruck that you took the time you did for this conversation, given all that you have going on. And I feel like I need to get the hell out of the way.
I've actually really, really enjoyed this, because it's one, you're not making me do it on camera. and two, I have a feeling that this won't be nearly as politically controversial amongst this audience as some of the other remarks that I've made. But if I can just say, that was a poor attempt at me making a joke. To be honest, I really have yet to meet somebody who has been against what we're proposing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where people fell on whether or not the war should have ended. That clearly is a conversation that has yet to be settled in this country. But to a person, I don't know of an individual that doesn't think that we should honor and keep this promise and get them out of there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the craziness surrounding some of the comments you made in the media over the last few days, I think just goes to show the bit larger problem in this country is that everything has to be partisan and everything has to be politicized.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, look, he knocked Trump on MSNBC. Excuse me. He knocked Biden on MSNBC. Yay. He's one of us. And then, oh, no, wait, he attacked Stephen. No, he's I mean, it's not about that. This isn't about red or blue. This is about, doing the right thing for these people.
That's exactly it. And I hope maybe this is a turning point in our national politics as well. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm saying it to you publicly first. This is a Hamilton exclusive. I'm going to be pushing for hearings. And I want it to be the Democratic Party that investigates this president and this fiasco, because we need to show the world that we can still self-govern.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll help amplify that as much as I can. And then, like I said, when you're successful in that, then we'll have a fun conversation.
Sounds good.
Matt, thank you. I appreciate it. Good luck to you. Get some rest if you can. And if not, just keep drinking the Irish whiskey.
Sounds good, buddy.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Have a good one.
You too.